Chapter 5. Play, Merman. Here for Morgan? Sophie withered inside. Had she actually said that? She turned her back on Darius's penetrating eyes with the fabulous lashes and counted her blessings. Keying on Darius's wounded ego would get her nowhere. Besides, she had much to be thankful for. The helicopter had landed safely and not in the ocean. Her little dip was more than enough to shiver her skin, and Morgan, despite his delay, was en route. He was determined, too, if she knew her target. Sophie had her presentation secured in her luggage stacked by the helipad. She may have another new client, too. Kendra seemed willing and able despite her obvious honeymoon haze. The bride may be a worthy replacement if Morgan took issue with Sophie passing on the pass he was sure to make. And Darius, a test of her resolve, hated bugs. That was another blessing in the making if Santa knew his business. An army of hulking and hairy crawlers would show up sooner or later. Lush green leaves, rambling brush, and flowering vines hid an assortment of unknowns snickering like laughing hyenas, no doubt. Did they have hyenas in Fiji? Who knew? Who cared? Sophie needed hand in this situation, leverage beyond flagging mottos of moving on. She preferred men the way Darius hated his bugs, you see. Furry, bold, unpredictable, yet petrified beneath that godlike exterior. Darius was all she'd wanted. She'd always responded to a deep-timbered voice. Devotion to family was another plus, in theory. The same family that recalled her shortfall was nowhere in sight. Nana had been suspiciously hard to get a hold of, too. Sophie's grandmother had lived with the couple before abruptly admitting herself into the nursing care system. Why had she done that? What had changed outside Sophie's inability to carry a child to term? She had trouble enough just getting pregnant and having Nana on site. Well, Sophie's brows twisted. She glared at Darius. He kicked a boat shoe against the sand, seemingly awaiting her instruction. What had he said to Nana? Sophie peered past him to the sea, willing another boat to appear. She trained her ears for the sound of another helicopter. Where was Morgan? Why had Nana left for an old folks' home? Sophie swiped knuckles across her brow when Darius took action. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Her husband stripped off wind-blown linen. What does it look like? You said you'd like being civil, so cut the trolling. Trolling, he answered back with an infuriating pucker. I'm attempting to stay cool. Seriously? She snapped when he reached for his waistband. His puppy pout nearly melted her. What? He said. Restrain yourself. But I'm dying here. Go for a swim then. Indulge yourself, she said. She needed distance, and he needed a cold shower. The glint of the single gold chain he wore accented furred terrain. Join me, he said. Those carpet lashes dipped and lifted. You're asking me to swim? Me? Attraction tugged her like a Mars-sized magnet on a helpless paperclip, but resistance was all she'd allow. The look on his face conveyed too clearly that he was reading the look on hers. Water was hell, but having Dari's arms around her, well. Why not you? He asked. You've overcome your aversion, obviously, so you know the water's fine. The water was fine, but they weren't discussing water. His wink reminded her of not-so-hidden dangers, the temperature, but not the great expanse that might suck her under. Muscles or sea made little difference. She refused temptation and Dari's able hands. Good grief. There she went, referring to Darius as Dari, her name for him, or so she'd thought. Sophie should thank that bombshell from the game store. One desperate dip in fine water was enough. And what if she fell off the sandbar? What if currents pulled her under like the recurring dream that she'd lived ever since Nana insisted she examine sea urchins up close and personal? That last childhood getaway stuck with her, and not because that's when Nana stopped being Nana. Losing Granddad had that effect. Losing Darius, Sophie sucked her cheeks and dismissed comparison. Sophie let her husband go. Divorce wasn't death. She shook her head and pulled away from inviting fingers, lifted and too close to touching. A rescue scenario featuring mouth-to-mouth made her shake. She slapped a mosquito looking to make a meal of her forearm, thankful that the rest seemed put off by the Mosey X repellent pill she'd gulped before leaving the helicopter. Well, he goaded. She gave her head another shake and pulled strands of hair that stuck to her mouth. The warm wind tousled his hair, too, still thick and glossy and iced with the lightest touch of silver. Why couldn't she have his baby? Just one. Two, maybe. You're cold? Darius would notice her shiver. I'm ticked off at Morgan. He's late, and I'm cranky. Both true. Go ahead, swim. Play merman if you must. I'll work off my mad on hiking through that mess. She turned toward the jungle, and thankfully, what looked like a wooden post, weathered by how many storms and a tide that could rise as high as the sky in her imagination. You're not going in there alone. If you're ready to move, I'll bring your bags. Darius bolted in the helipad's direction before she could argue, showing off like traditional men did when attempting to woo whatever it is they wanted. The change came once they secured their woman. Sophie focused on pushing through leg-swiping foliage. If she wrapped this up, leveraging Morgan's tardiness, her putting up with his having invited Darius, she could leave. She could present to the newlyweds and snatch another client. Darius muscled up her luggage and picked up the pace beside her, her backhanding of an overhang of vines snagging her hat. Thank you. Sophie caught herself ogling his legs again. So we're competing on this one. If it pleases you to think we're rivals, then yes, Sophie said. He'd think what he wanted anyway. Darius's grin, pearly white and reliable as waves lapping the shore, goaded her. He was a shark, like she'd said. The Greek was predatory when it came to work and women. He'd been more than exclusive when it came to her, but his cooing at Gamer's Grotto said that was at an end. He was psyching her out to get to Morgan. That had to be it. The billionaire Greek had accumulated his wealth by way of silent stalking. He only rose from the depths when someone else's hard effort led them to believe they'd scored a meal. Head tripping was his specialty. That's why she was struggling with tingling skin and eyes that refused to stay in her head. She'd not only been sharked, but psychoanalyzed for the purpose of exploitation. But who cared? She was screaming inside, from the depths of her desert-dry mouth to her touch my toes and everywhere else. A shriek sounded in the overhead canopy. Sophie startled. Her hat tumbled along with her spirits. Dear God, that sounds like a child, she breathed. So says anyone plagued by the Matamanoa bird. A what? She demanded. The thing shrieked again, a haunting wail, and Sophie licked her lower lip to regain herself. Maternal instincts flooded her every sense, despite the incongruity of instinct run amok. Are you sure? She asked. She retrieved her hat, slapped it on, and contemplated downsizing the contents of her purse as the heavy bag swung to one side. Sounds like a baby to me. Mating season began in November. This is December. Yes, but the poor birds will keep at it through January most likely. A full 3 months. Great, she huffed, feeling the opposite. Had Darius been to Fiji before? During mating season, if not, how would he know about Momo birds? The man was no naturalist. It will be a long night, he said. Our feathered friends are nocturnal, and if this fellow is up, he'll spur competition. Not the kind I prefer, she snapped. Her skin itched. And that's not my kind of clubhouse. What was Morgan thinking? Darius trudged ahead, dropped her bags, and grunted at the shack. Tiny, made of palm, and with one wall crumbled to invite all that Fiji offered. But that may be all we've got if our client doesn't hightail it to this meeting. I'm sorry, Sophie. He sounded distressed. Darius even rubbed his neck, wrung it more likely, and kicked the dirt again. But Sophie suspected he was anything but put off. That bare chest was too tanned and happily exposed. Another Momo joined the chorus. Sophie cringed. Long night, you think?